Sierra Leone's judicial crisis and ministerial impunity, the fraudulent divorce scandal of Dr. Denis Sandy and its broader implications. Welcome to the Bold African Voice, BAV, where we go beyond the headlines to uncover the truth behind Africa's most pressing political and legal stories. I'm Abdul Karim Kargbo, born and raised in Africa. Today, we bring you a story that strikes at the very heart of justice, power, and accountability in Sierra Leone. A top government minister, a fake court order, and a scandal that could shake the foundations of the nation's legal system. Is this a case of elite impunity or a reckoning long overdue? Stay tuned as we break it all down with facts, analysis, and a Pan-African lens. In a nation that has projected itself as a global advocate for women's rights and judicial reform, the unfolding scandal involving Sierra Leone's Minister of Works, Dr. Denis Moinina Sandy, represents a striking contradiction. A Judicial Committee report, spearheaded by Honorary Justice Glenna Thompson JSC and Justices Manfred Sese JA and Fatmata Bintu Al-Hadi JA, has revealed disturbing details of Dr. Sandy's alleged involvement in a fraudulent divorce scheme, implicating judicial officers and exposing systemic flaws in the justice system. The report, coupled with new legal filings and public outcries, raises broader questions about Sierra Leone's commitment to justice and rule of law, especially in contrast to developments across Africa, where governments are responding more decisively to allegations of misconduct by public officials. Anatomy of a scandal. What the Judiciary report reveals. The investigative committee established by Honorary Chief Justice Kamba Kamanda on January 23, 2025, uncovered that Dr. Sandy actively relied on a falsified decree absolute to claim a divorce from his wife, Mary Kai Sandy. This document, reportedly signed by Deputy Master and Registrar Lansana Kotor Kamara, had no corresponding file in the court registry. The committee stated unequivocally that the order was fraudulent, recommending it be expunged, and referred to the Anti-Corruption Commission for Criminal Investigation, Judiciary Report, paragraphs 88-89. Crucially, Dr. Sandy never filed a legitimate petition, hired legal counsel, or appeared before a judge. Instead, he placed blind trust in one Magnus Coker, a character with no legal standing, who supposedly facilitated the entire divorce process. This not only exposed a personal disregard for judicial norms, but highlighted dangerous cracks in Sierra Leone's court administration. One does not need a law degree to know that a lawyer needs to be consulted, and that one does not rely on a random character's assurances that he can fix it. Judiciary Report, paragraph 57. Dr. Sandy's testimony was dismissed as inconsistent and implausible, suggesting a deliberate attempt to avoid proper legal scrutiny and protect his public image. Broader implications, institutional rot or individual lapse. While the scandal centers on Dr. Sandy, the Judiciary Report paints a much grimmer picture of institutional decay. Other forged orders were discovered, revealing a pattern of judicial officers exploiting procedural gaps. The report emphasized the need for an independent external audit of court processes, urging sweeping reforms to prevent future abuses. Judiciary Report, Para 96. This is not an isolated event. In 2021, a similar scandal in Ghana saw judges filmed accepting bribes, which led to the dismissal of 22 judicial staff following a public inquiry. Source: Ghana Judicial Scandal Report, 2021. In Kenya, Chief Justice Martha Koome has spearheaded reforms to digitize court records to prevent such administrative manipulation. Sierra Leone now stands at the same crossroads, whether to reform or risk further erosion of public trust, legal fallout, and public reactions. The judiciary's revelations triggered a separate legal filing by Betts and Barawa Solicitors, a reputable law firm whose name was fraudulently used in registering Dr. Sandy's divorce decree. The firm now seeks 2.5 million new leones in damages, citing reputational harm and fraudulent misrepresentation, High Court filing 2025. In another twist, Michael and Michael solicitors representing Mrs. Sandy formally challenged the validity of the divorce order. They argue that the required service of process never occurred, and that the presiding judge named in the decree, Honor Justice Ganda, had no knowledge of the proceedings, adding further weight to allegations of judicial forgery and impersonation. Personal dimensions. A stepdaughter speaks out. Public outcry deepened when Dr. Sandy's stepdaughter, Amira Karoma, released a video alleging further misconduct. While her claims remain under investigation, they resonate against a backdrop of government-led campaigns like Hands Off Our Girls, championed by First Lady Fatima Mada Bio. Amira's video adds a personal and gendered dimension to a case already steeped in legal and political controversy. The silence from State House on this matter is deafening, especially in light of the government's international advocacy. The Bold African Voice, BAV, editorial commentary. The government's deafening silence? A case of selective accountability? President Julius Maada Bio has led Sierra Leone's charge on international platforms to promote access to justice for survivors of sexual violence. His administration was instrumental in passing the 2024 UNGA resolution that highlighted justice for 1.3 billion global survivors, UN General Assembly records, SEPT 2024. Yet the silence on Dr. Sandy's alleged misconduct starkly contrasts with this international advocacy. Comparatively, other African states have acted more decisively. On April 24, 2025, Namibia's president relieved Agriculture Minister McAlbert Hengari of his duties and allowed his arrest after rape allegations surfaced, setting an example of zero tolerance. Hengari denied the charges but was nonetheless investigated and prosecuted, a precedent Sierra Leone must seriously consider. Systemic risk to Sierra Leone's international credibility. The scandal risks undermining Sierra Leone's reputation as a reformer and rights advocate. Donor agencies and international development partners often link judicial integrity to foreign assistance. A failure to act decisively against Dr. Sandy may jeopardize foreign aid, diplomatic relationships, and public confidence in both government and judiciary. What comes next? Recommendations and forward strategy to restore public confidence and safeguard. Sierra Leone's global standing, urgent actions are required. 1. Immediate suspension of Dr. Denis Sandy, pending the conclusion of Anti-Corruption Commission investigations. 2. Criminal prosecution. If ACC findings confirm complicity, criminal charges should be filed against all involved parties. 3. Judiciary overhaul. Launch a nationwide external audit of court systems, focusing on registry integrity, decree issuance, and digitalization of case records. 4. Whistleblower protections. Encourage reporting of systemic abuse without fear of retaliation. 5. Legislative review. Amend the matrimonial causes rules and registration protocols to close gaps that allow fraudulent legal outcomes. Africa-wide comparison. The lessons of leadership and integrity. Sierra Leone is not alone in facing judicial misconduct and political impunity. However, other African nations are moving more boldly. Nigeria, judicial panels on police brutality led to wide-ranging reforms after the NSARS movement. Botswana, public officials implicated in corruption are routinely prosecuted, safeguarding national credibility. South Africa, the Zondo Commission on State Capture held top officials accountable, culminating in criminal referrals. Sierra Leone must demonstrate that it too values transparency over tribal or political loyalty. A failure to act risks solidifying perceptions of selective justice, where the elite are shielded and the vulnerable are exposed. Public sentiment and erosion of trust. The scandal involving Dr. Denis Sandy has reverberated throughout Sierra Leonean society, triggering fierce public debate across radio, television, and especially on social media platforms like Facebook, WhatsApp and Twitter X, prominent civil society voices, legal professionals, and feminist activists have not only questioned the integrity of the judiciary, but also challenged what many now view as a dangerous culture of impunity within the BO administration. Groups like Campaign for Human Rights and Development International, CHRDI, and Women Against Violence and Exploitation in Society, WAVES, have issued strong public statements demanding immediate action. CHRDI's executive director, Abdul M. Fatoma, emphasized in a press release that the justice system must not become a tool for the powerful to manipulate with impunity, while Waves called on First Lady Fatima Bio to personally address the contradictions between her Hands Off Our Girls campaign and the silence surrounding Dr. Sandy. Public sentiment is increasingly marked by skepticism, especially among the youth who form the largest demographic in Sierra Leone. Many young citizens, already disillusioned by widespread unemployment and high level corruption, now view this scandal as proof that justice is selective and that political elites operate above the law. A trending Twitter hashtag, Justice for Mary Sandy, has emerged, with thousands expressing solidarity with the minister's wife and outrage over the judiciary's vulnerability to manipulation. An online petition demanding Dr. Sandy's suspension gathered over 10,000 signatures within 72 hours, a clear signal of the public's appetite for accountability. The role of the Anti-Corruption Commission, a test of independence. The Anti-Corruption Commission, ACC, headed by Francis Ben Kaifala, now finds itself in a critical spotlight. Historically, the ACC has enjoyed commendations for pursuing high-profile cases, including actions against former education and health officials. However, this case presents a different kind of challenge, one that touches the heart of the presidency and raises questions of political interference. While the Judiciary Committee has referred Dr. Sandy to the ACC, there has been no public announcement from the Commission beyond an acknowledgement of the referral. Transparency advocates are pressing Kaifala to provide regular public updates and ensure that the investigation is insulated from political pressures. Failure to prosecute or even delay in pursuing the matter could tarnish the ACC's credibility and raise concerns about whether anti-corruption institutions in Sierra Leone are truly independent or only empowered when the targets are politically expendable. International organizations like Transparency International and Human Rights Watch are already monitoring the case, and any sign of a whitewash could prompt calls for sanctions or cuts in donor funding, particularly from European and North American partners who support governance reform programs. A political liability for President Bio. President Julius Maada Bio has staked his legacy on progressive reforms, particularly in education, women's rights, and international diplomacy. His government's proactive role in pushing global legislation on sexual violence, such as the 2024 UN Gay Resolution, earned him international accolades. But the Dr. Sandy affair threatens to erode those achievements. Opposition parties have seized the moment. The All People's Congress, APC, Sierra Leone's main opposition party, issued a statement condemning state-enabled judicial abuse and demanded a parliamentary inquiry into the matter. Social media commentators have echoed similar sentiments, urging the president to demonstrate his commitment to accountability by relieving Dr. Sandy of his duties. Privately, sources within State House have indicated that while President Bio is monitoring the situation, no internal disciplinary measures have been initiated as of May 2nd, 2025. This indecision has only fueled public frustration and speculation about a possible cover-up. President Bio's failure to act decisively could transform what was once seen as a judicial scandal into a full-blown political crisis, especially as the country approaches the 2026 midterm elections. Voter sentiment, already strained by economic hardship and inflation, may be further aggravated by the perception of selective justice and executive inaction. Legal precedents and pathways to justice. Under Sierra Leone's legal framework, the matrimonial causes rules and the High Court rules are clear. Divorce must be pursued through a verifiable court process with proper documentation, legal representation, and personal service of petitions. The Sandy case subverts every element of this process. Legal scholars, including Professor Abdoulaye Conte and constitutional lawyer Augustin Mara, have argued that the fraudulent decree could be prosecuted under multiple provisions of the Offenses Against the Person Act, Forgery Act, and Anti-Corruption Act. Potential charges include forgery and uttering a false document, conspiracy to pervert the course of justice, abuse of public office, corruption in public life. Additionally, judicial officers implicated, namely Lansana Kotor Kamara and Commander Joel Kamara, could face disciplinary proceedings from the Judicial and Legal Service Commission. The Judiciary report explicitly recommends their removal, citing direct involvement in the preparation and circulation of fictitious court orders, Judiciary Report, Para 86. A key test now lies in whether these legal pathways will be pursued independently or buried under political pressure. Gender, power, and the politics of silence. Beyond its legal dimensions, the Sandy scandal exposes the enduring intersection between gender, power, and impunity in African governance systems. Mary Kai Sandy's silence, whether voluntary or imposed, has drawn comparisons to other cases across Africa where women have been sidelined or manipulated in high-profile political scandals. This dynamic is not new. In Uganda, the wife of a prominent general faced public scrutiny and intimidation after challenging her husband's divorce filing, while in Zimbabwe, political elites have historically used the courts to orchestrate quiet separations that shield them from public scrutiny. In most of these cases, women's voices are minimized and state institutions are weaponized to preserve political images. In Sierra Leone, where the government has placed gender equity at the center of its public policy narrative, the optics of this scandal are especially damaging. If the state fails to defend Mary Kai Sandy's right to due process, it risks nullifying years of advocacy work on behalf of women and girls. Historical parallels in post-conflict justice systems in Africa. The crisis currently unfolding in Sierra Leone's judiciary is not occurring in a vacuum. Across Africa, several post-conflict nations have grappled with the challenge of rebuilding trust in judicial institutions, which were either severely weakened or systematically politicized during periods of conflict. Sierra Leone's civil war, 1991-2002, left not only physical scars but institutional ones, particularly in the judiciary, which many citizens still view as vulnerable to elite influence and manipulation. In Liberia, for example, the post-war era saw the appointment of Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, members who exposed systemic judicial weaknesses. Yet, 2 decades later, corruption and executive interference continue to plague the legal system. The 2024 refusal of Liberian authorities to enforce a Supreme Court ruling against political appointees highlighted the fragile state of judicial independence in that country, an eerie echo of Sierra Leone's current trajectory. See Daily Observer Liberia, Jan 2024. Similarly, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, post-war judicial reforms were undermined by elite interests, where falsified court documents were routinely used to settle political scores or manipulate inheritance and land rights. Reforms launched under international donor pressure often stalled, once political elites realized that an independent judiciary posed a threat to entrenched interests. Sierra Leone's judiciary, once hailed for its post-war resilience, including the hosting of the Special Court for Sierra Leone, SCSL, that tried Charles Taylor, now faces a moment of reckoning. The fraudulent divorce scandal threatens to undo 2 decades of reform credibility and offers a stark reminder that institutional memory alone is not enough. Sustained political will and accountability must reinforce legal frameworks. Reactions from the diplomatic and donor community international partners are now closely watching how Sierra Leone handles the Denis Sandy scandal, particularly those that have invested heavily in justice sector reforms. Since 2018, the European Union, World Bank, UNDP, and UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO, have provided millions in funding to modernize court infrastructure, improve case management systems, and promote gender-responsive justice. Privately, diplomatic sources have expressed concerns that the Sandy affair could jeopardize these gains. A senior official at the EU delegation to Sierra Leone, speaking under anonymity, stated, "We expect credible action. Our support is conditional on transparency and structural reform. If a sitting minister can bypass the judiciary without consequences, then our partnership must be reevaluated." Already, UN Women and the Office of the UN Special Representative on Sexual Violence in Conflict have sought clarification from the Ministry of Gender and Children's Affairs on how this case aligns with Sierra Leone's commitments to protect survivors of gender-based violence. Donors may also begin linking further disbursement of development aid to demonstrated progress in tackling high-level corruption and judicial abuse. A review clause built into the Justice Sector Support Program 2023-2026 stipulates that deliberate undermining of judicial integrity constitutes a breach of partnership obligations, warranting suspension or redirection of funds. This could have ripple effects across multiple sectors, particularly education and infrastructure, areas in which Minister Sandy has previously served and where donor funds are deeply entrenched. Implications for the 2028 general elections. As Sierra Leone approaches its 2028 general elections, the Sandy scandal presents a potentially explosive issue. While not yet a campaign flashpoint, opposition parties are already laying the groundwork to frame the incident as emblematic of President Bio's failure to combat impunity within his cabinet. For the ruling Sierra Leone People's Party, SLPP, the decision to either protect or prosecute Dr. Sandy could shape the narrative going into the next election cycle. If Dr. Sandy remains in office without accountability, opposition forces are likely to use it as evidence of selective justice, eroded rule of law, and a betrayal of public trust, particularly among women and younger voters. Civil society groups are also mobilizing ahead of the election. Organizations like National Elections Watch, NEW, and Campaign for Good Governance, CGG, have begun monitoring not just electoral preparations, but the broader democratic climate, including how the Sandy affair is handled. Their reports will likely influence both domestic voter confidence and international election observation missions. This also puts pressure on the Electoral Commission of Sierra Leone, ECSL, which is under scrutiny following allegations of bias in the 2023 general elections. If public confidence in all democratic institutions, from the courts to the commission, continues to erode, voter apathy and civil unrest could follow. The silence of Sierra Leone's parliament, a missed oversight opportunity. Notably absent in the current crisis is Sierra Leone's parliament, which has thus far remained silent on the matter. This silence is particularly troubling, given Parliament's constitutional role in providing oversight of the executive and ensuring that ministers act in accordance with the law. Section 93 of the 1991 Constitution empowers parliamentary committees to investigate the conduct of any minister and to summon any person to appear before it. Yet, despite the damning judicial report and a public outcry, there has been no motion for censure or call for a committee inquiry into the actions of Dr. Sandy. The Public Accounts Committee, PACI, chaired by the Deputy Speaker of Parliament, has in the past investigated misappropriations in various ministries. Its failure to act now may be interpreted as political reluctance to confront executive impunity, raising broader concerns about the effectiveness and independence of legislative oversight in Sierra Leone's democracy. Opposition MPs have suggested that they may invoke Standing Order 23 to demand an urgent debate, but as of this writing, no date has been scheduled. Regional media and civil society reactions, a test of Pan-African accountability. As the scandal involving Minister Denis Sandy gains international traction, regional media outlets and civil society organizations across West Africa have begun to weigh in. Prominent West African newspapers such as Premium Times, Nigeria, The Liberian Observer, and Le Pays, Burkina Faso, have featured opinion pieces criticizing the lack of prompt executive action in Sierra Leone, contrasting it with more decisive responses by neighboring governments when public officials are embroiled in legal controversies. For example, an editorial published on April 30th, 2025, in Ghana's Daily Graphic noted, Sierra Leone's silence on a ministerial scandal of this magnitude suggests that reformist rhetoric may not yet be matched with institutional courage. West Africa cannot afford a return to governance models where elites manipulate legal systems with impunity. At the same time, the West African Civil Society Forum, WACSOF, issued a joint statement with national chapters in Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, and Cote d'Ivoire, calling on ECOWAS to closely monitor the situation. The statement emphasized that Sierra Leone, as a signatory to multiple regional anti-corruption frameworks and human rights conventions, must uphold the standards it has pledged to protect. It is imperative for the region that Sierra Leone demonstrates fidelity to due process, equality before the law, and institutional integrity. Anything less weakens our collective democratic aspirations. This Pan-African engagement adds further pressure on the government of Sierra Leone to act decisively, not just for domestic credibility, but for regional solidarity and leadership. The legacy of Dr. Denis Sandy, a controversial career in public office. While this scandal may be the most serious to date, Dr. Denis Moinina Sandy is no stranger to controversy. His tenure as Minister of Lands, Housing, and the Environment was marked by frequent allegations of heavy-handed land acquisition, arbitrary evictions, and public confrontations with citizens and civil society actors. In 2020, a widely publicized incident saw Dr. Sandy personally lead a team of security officers to demolish structures on disputed lands in Freetown's Upper Allentown, sparking outrage and a parliamentary inquiry. Although the matter was later downplayed, it raised critical questions about his governance style and respect for due process. Similarly, during his earlier tenure in the same ministry under President Ernest Bai Koroma's government, Dr. Sandy was dismissed for what was officially termed administrative insubordination, though insiders cited allegations of corruption and unauthorized land allocations. He was later controversially reappointed by President Bio in 2018, a move that shocked political observers and sparked fears of patronage over merit. In light of his controversial record, critics argue that the fraudulent divorce scandal is not an aberration, but part of a pattern, one that has been enabled by a political system more concerned with loyalty than accountability. The failure to hold Dr. Sandy accountable in past controversies emboldened him. His current scandal is simply the natural consequence of unchecked power, said Dr. Rashid Doumbouya, director of Legal Link and a former human rights commissioner. The feminist response, mobilizing for structural reform. Sierra Leone's vibrant feminist and women's rights movement has not been silent. Several organizations, including Women's Forum Sierra Leone, 50/50 Group, and Rainbow Initiative, have called for a gender-sensitive lens in investigating the scandal, not only because a woman was a target of legal fraud, but because the broader judicial rot disproportionately affects women seeking justice in cases of domestic abuse, sexual assault, and inheritance rights. A recent joint press briefing by 50/50 Group and Women in the Media, Sierra Leone, WIMSL, stressed that the fraudulent use of the courts to dissolve a marriage without the woman's knowledge undermines all our efforts to promote women's legal rights. This is not just a legal failure, it is a feminist crisis. They are demanding the establishment of a special judicial gender task force to investigate how women's access to justice is compromised by elite manipulation, a public apology to Mary Kai Sandy, legislative safeguards to prevent non-consensual or fraudulent divorce proceedings, a public commitment from the First Lady to engage with women's organizations on this issue. This response has begun shifting the national conversation from a ministerial scandal to a structural gender justice debate, a development that could have lasting implications for legal reforms in Sierra Leone. The role of religious institutions, moral voice, or political silence. In Sierra Leone, religious institutions have historically played an influential role in shaping national morality, mediating conflict, and advocating for justice. During the Civil War, the Inter-Religious Council of Sierra Leone, IRCSL, was a central player in brokering peace and encouraging civic responsibility. Yet in the current crisis surrounding Minister Denis Sandy's fraudulent divorce scandal, these moral gatekeepers have so far remained largely silent. The conspicuous lack of condemnation or public concern from leading religious bodies, such as the Council of Imams, the Conference of Catholic Bishops, and Evangelical Churches, has sparked debate among theologians and human rights defenders alike. While some clerics privately acknowledge the seriousness of the allegations, few have used their pulpits or platforms to demand accountability or express solidarity with victims of judicial corruption. This silence may be rooted in fear of political retaliation, or perhaps a reluctance to engage in what is perceived as political matters. However, many citizens argue that the moral decay reflected in this scandal demands a clear and courageous response from faith leaders. Dr. Sylvia Blyden, a former minister of social welfare and outspoken advocate for constitutional rights, remarked in a radio interview, "When the church and mosque go silent on injustices that affect women, families, and the integrity of the nation, they become complicit in the erosion of the moral fabric they claim to uphold." Some religious groups are beginning to mobilize quietly. The Christian Lawyers Fellowship is reportedly drafting a position paper on the judicial implications of the scandal, while several imams have privately supported calls for prayers and fasting against corruption in high places. However, unless this moral awakening becomes more public and unified, religious institutions risk diminishing their role as arbiters of national conscience. The psychological and cultural fallout, a nation in cynical disbelief. Beyond legal and political implications, the scandal has triggered a deep psychological impact on the nation's collective consciousness. For many Sierra Leoneans, especially the youth and rural populations who already feel disenfranchised, this case reinforces a growing belief that the system is irreparably rigged. Radio call-in shows and street interviews in districts like Port Loko, Moyamba, and Kono have featured voices expressing disbelief, fatigue, and cynicism. One caller to Radio Democracy's popular Good Morning Salone program said, "If a minister can fake divorce paper and still sit in office, what hope does the poor man have when he's falsely accused or evicted from land?" This kind of emotional disillusionment erodes national identity and trust, not just in government, but in the very idea of justice. For a post-conflict society still healing from decades of war trauma, Institutional betrayal of this magnitude can deepen wounds and stoke latent tensions. Mental health professionals have also raised concern. The Sierra Leone Psychological Association issued a statement highlighting how high profile scandals involving fraud and gender injustice can trigger trauma, anxiety, and helplessness in survivors of abuse and victims of past judicial failings. Cultural anthropologists point out that the scandal cuts deeply across Sierra Leone's traditional notions of marriage, respect for elders, and communal justice. The use of fake court documents to forcibly dissolve a marriage, especially by someone in public office, is not just a legal violation, but a symbolic breach of sacred trust in social institutions. Learning from Africa's judicial reform champions, a comparative outlook. To avoid a full-blown legitimacy crisis, Sierra Leone must look beyond its borders for models of successful judicial reform and restoration of institutional trust. Several African nations, though once plagued by similar scandals, have made tangible progress in rebuilding judicial credibility through a combination of political will, external oversight, and citizen engagement. Rwanda, a digital transparency model. After the 1994 genocide, Rwanda faced an even more devastated judiciary than Sierra Leone. Yet, under President Paul Kagame, the country introduced sweeping reforms, including the digitization of court records, establishment of independent oversight bodies, and swift sanctions against corrupt judges. Public case tracking systems now allow citizens to monitor court processes in real time, minimizing opportunities for falsification and delay. South Africa, accountability through public inquiry. The Zondo Commission 2018-2022 into state capture by former President Jacob Zuma's regime is a textbook example of how public judicial inquiry can restore trust. Though politically contentious, the Commission's televised hearings, public testimony, and direct referral of implicated officials to prosecutors sent a strong message of zero tolerance for abuse of state machinery. Ghana, institutionalizing integrity. Ghana's judiciary service has introduced randomized judge assignments and biometric court attendance for lawyers and court staff. These systems reduce collusion and help track judicial behavior. More importantly, the country's Judicial Council regularly publishes disciplinary outcomes, providing transparency and deterrence. For Sierra Leone, adapting such reforms could involve mandatory digital archiving of all decrees and court decisions, introduction of anonymous whistleblower portals within the judiciary, external audits by regional judicial commissions, e.g., the African Court on Human and People's Rights, legislation criminalizing the misuse of court-issued documents with enhanced penalties for public officers. Such moves would not only deter future misconduct, but also signal to the public and international observers that the state is serious about cleaning house. Reforming legal education and professional ethics, planting seeds of judicial integrity. One of the most underexplored but essential elements in preventing scandals like the Denis Sandy affair is legal education. In Sierra Leone, as in much of West Africa, the training of lawyers and judicial officers has often prioritized technical proficiency over ethical consciousness. Yet the manipulation of court documents, collusion with rogue intermediaries, and blatant disregard for due process, evident in this case, signal a moral gap within the legal profession that must be urgently addressed. Sierra Leone's Council of Legal Education, which governs the administration of the Sierra Leone Law School, has been notably silent throughout the scandal. But legal scholars and reform advocates are beginning to demand curricular overhaul and professional development reforms, including mandatory courses on legal ethics, judicial accountability, and gender justice, simulation-based modules in detecting and reporting fraudulent court processes, case studies of real-life judicial abuse including the Denis Sandy scandal, as part of applied jurisprudence, internships in judicial reform programs, and anti-corruption watchdogs. Countries like Kenya and Namibia have introduced law school clinics where students assist real clients under faculty supervision, exposing them to the intersection of law, poverty, and power. These experiences are proven to reduce cynicism and increase professional integrity post graduation. Legal education reform must also extend beyond students. Continuing professional development, CPD, should be made compulsory for all practicing lawyers and judges. The General Legal Counsel and Judicial and Legal Service Commission must enforce stricter disciplinary measures, including revocation of licenses for those complicit in judicial fraud or misconduct. Ultimately, rebuilding the legal profession's moral foundation is not just about punishing wrongdoers, but transforming the pipeline of future lawyers into agents of justice rather than facilitators of impunity. Trust deficit in the Anti Corruption Commission. Symbol or substance? The referral of Dr. Denis Sandy's case to the Anti Corruption Commission, ACC, was met with cautious optimism. Under the leadership of Francis Ben Kaifala, the ACC has chalked up notable successes in recovering stolen funds and prosecuting mid-level corruption. But its perceived reluctance to tackle entrenched political elites, especially sitting ministers, has become a source of public skepticism. In previous high-profile cases, such as the 2019 audit of COVID-19 funds and the misuse of educational subsidies, the ACC's investigations were seen as slow and inconclusive. Critics argue that the institution's independence is compromised by political alignment with the presidency and a strategic preference for targeting safe offenders. The Denis Sandy affair represents a unique litmus test. Unlike previous corruption cases focused on misappropriation of funds, this is a case of judicial tampering, abuse of office, forgery, and deception, issues that strike at the rule of law and institutional legitimacy. Transparency activists are now demanding daily or weekly public updates on the status of the investigation, protection of whistleblowers within the judiciary and legal registry, clear timelines for prosecution decisions, independent monitoring committees comprising members of civil society, legal experts, and international observers. Failure to prosecute or a decision to close the investigation without explanation would further erode public confidence and damage the credibility of Sierra Leone's anti-corruption architecture. As one civil society activist tweeted, "The ACC cannot be a lion against the weak and a lamb before the powerful. Justice must be blind, not politically selective." Toward a national dialogue on judicial integrity and women's rights. The broader themes emerging from the Denis Sandy scandal, gender injustice, judicial corruption, and political impunity, require more than administrative fixes. They demand a national reckoning. Several civil society networks are now proposing the convening of a national dialogue on judicial integrity and women's rights, bringing together key stakeholders from government, civil society, religious institutions, traditional leadership, and international partners. The objectives of such a dialogue could include establishing a citizens' charter on justice and gender equity, reviewing laws and procedures that allow unilateral or fraudulent divorces, creating a national registry of disciplinary action against judicial officers, launching a Truth and Accountability Commission to examine institutional abuse within the judiciary post-2002, developing a public education campaign on legal rights, especially for women and rural citizens. If well coordinated and publicly broadcast, this dialogue could serve as a cathartic moment for a nation increasingly weary of elite abuse and bureaucratic opacity. It would also place Sierra Leone ahead of several regional peers in acknowledging and addressing the nexus of gender, governance, and institutional trust. The silence of the First Lady, a missed opportunity for consistency. While the First Lady of Sierra Leone Fatima Maada Bayo, has championed the landmark Hands Off Our Girls campaign and garnered global applause for leading advocacy on sexual violence. Her silence on the current scandal involving Dr. Sandy threatens to undermine the moral credibility of her activism. To date, the Office of the First Lady has issued no public statement, despite the scandal involving allegations of a fraudulent divorce against a woman without her knowledge, a stepdaughter's public outcry for justice, systemic abuse within institutions meant to protect women's rights and legal dignity. This silence has raised uncomfortable questions. Can the state advocate for women globally while ignoring injustice against a prominent woman at home? Are some women more protected than others, depending on who their abusers are? Some feminist voices now accuse the First Lady of performative activism, strong on international platforms, but muted when political proximity makes speaking out inconvenient. The 50-50 group's latest bulletin stated bluntly, the voice of the First Lady is needed most when it is politically difficult to speak, not when it is safe to do so abroad. Restoring consistency in advocacy will require clear, unequivocal condemnation of the abuse of legal procedures against women, regardless of the status of the perpetrator. Anything less renders the fight for women's rights vulnerable to accusations of partisanship and selective concern. International Legal Commentary and Regional Bar Association response. The legal fraternity across Africa has begun to voice concern over the implications of the Denis Sandy scandal, not just for Sierra Leone, but for the region's collective effort to uphold judicial integrity. The Pan-African Lawyers Union, PALU, headquartered in Arusha, Tanzania, issued a formal statement urging Sierra Leone's judiciary and executive branches to act decisively and transparently. The statement read in part, this case undermines public confidence in legal systems not only in Sierra Leone, but across the continent. It reveals how elite actors can manipulate judicial processes to evade scrutiny and escape accountability. If left unaddressed, it could become a precedent that emboldens similar abuses elsewhere. Similarly, the West African Bar Association, WABA, called for an independent, regionally supported investigation team to assist Sierra Leone's Anti-Corruption Commission. They offered technical assistance in auditing judicial records and reviewing questionable decrees issued over the past 5 years. Legal scholars from the University of Cape Town, University of Ghana, and Obafemi Awolowo University in Nigeria have jointly published op-eds analyzing the Sandy case as a cautionary tale on how executive overreach, judicial complacency, and weak enforcement mechanisms can corrode even the most promising post-conflict democracies. Their recommendations include the standardization of judicial records across ECOWAS member states to prevent document fraud, the creation of a regional blacklist of judicial officers found guilty of misconduct, a call for women's legal protection protocols to be enforced through independent monitoring units, long-term risks, donor confidence, and rule of law benchmarks. The global development community is watching closely. Sierra Leone has positioned itself as a model for transitional justice, gender equity, and public sector reform, making it a preferred partner for multilateral institutions like the World Bank, UNDP, and DFID, UK. But that reputation is now under severe strain. Donor confidence is highly sensitive to indicators of systemic corruption, especially within judicial systems. A recent internal memo circulated by a major European embassy in Freetown, cited by the Bold African Voice, warned continued silence or inaction over the Sandy affair could trigger a re-evaluation of ongoing rule of law funding streams and jeopardize future program eligibility under EU governance frameworks. The Millennium Challenge Corporation, MCC, a U.S. foreign aid agency, also includes judicial independence and control of corruption as core indicators for continued funding eligibility. Sierra Leone's status in upcoming scorecards may be adversely affected if this scandal is not seen to result in credible legal action. Moreover, the reputational damage could extend beyond monetary consequences. It may erode Sierra Leone's soft power in international human rights circles, particularly its recent gains at the United Nations and African Union on gender justice and anti-corruption advocacy. Advice to African leaders: strengthen institutions, not individuals. The Denis Sandy scandal is not unique to Sierra Leone. It is symptomatic of a broader challenge across many African states where individual political power is often prioritized over institutional accountability. From Kenya to Cameroon, from South Africa to Sudan, political survival and elite impunity have too often undermined the independence of courts, anti-corruption agencies, and oversight bodies. To break this cycle, African leaders must: 1. Institutionalize consequence management. No public official should be exempt from investigation or prosecution, regardless of their proximity to power. Rule of law must apply equally. 2. Decouple loyalty from appointments. Ministerial and judicial appointments must be based on merit, integrity, and competence, not political allegiance or personal loyalty. 3. Safeguard whistleblowers and journalists. The role of the media and civil society in exposing corruption is critical. Leaders must protect, not punish, those who speak truth to power. 4. Invest in legal education and judicial oversight. Ethical training, transparent case management systems, and independent disciplinary boards must be the norm, not the exception. 5. Lead by example. The silence of those in leadership, especially when facing allegations involving their allies, is the loudest signal of complicity. Courageous leadership means speaking even when it is uncomfortable. A moment of reckoning for Sierra Leone and Africa at large. The fraudulent divorce scandal involving Minister Denis Moinina Sandy is more than a personal legal infraction. It is a national stress test for Sierra Leone's judiciary, its anti-corruption framework, and the political will of its leadership. At stake is the integrity of institutions built over 2 decades of post-conflict reconstruction, the credibility of gender justice advocacy, and the international trust that fuels development cooperation. How Sierra Leone responds will not only shape its domestic political future, but may also define its standing among democratic reformers across the continent. This moment demands more than silence. It demands action, swift, transparent, and equitable. For if justice can be bought, manipulated, or faked at the highest levels, then the very promise of democracy and the rule of law in Africa begins to crumble. African leaders must see in this scandal not just a local controversy, but a Pan-African warning. A healthy democracy is not measured by speeches at the UN, but by how its leaders respond when the law is tested, especially by one of their own. The world is watching, the people are speaking, and justice, genuine, impartial, and bold, must not remain a distant dream. Thank you for watching The Bold African Voice BAV. If you find this report insightful, don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts. Subscribe to The Bold African Voice BAV for more fearless commentary, African news breakdowns, and deep dives into the issues that matter most. Together, let's raise the standard of accountability across Africa, one story at a time. Until next time, stay bold and stay informed.